What have we got here, Ian?
This is the postern gate, which is all that remains of the royal residence of Northampton Castle. But what was grabbing me was the quality of the stone, because you've got this Jurassic causeway running across from Bath, comes through the Cotswolds, comes into Northampton like a flowing yellow stream that original British mapping geologist William Smith was making his way through here when he ended up in the church across the road.
Actually, on the Jurassic Way that he had discovered, yeah, I mean, because apparently it runs right, it crosses the Nen by the station.
Cotswolds, Northampton.
Yeah, and it goes up from Bath to Lincoln.
Yeah, so it's crucial.
And so it must have been one of the first tracks that actually made Britain into a connected country rather than just a bunch of isolated settlements.
But just coming out of the station, actually rubbing your hand against this stone, you're straight into it. The trial of Thomas of Becket, for example. I mean,
It took place here.
yeah, absolutely.
Amazing.
And this was only dismantled to make the railway station.
Crazy. And that is the experience of walking with Iain Sinclair. We have literally just come out of Northampton station and we're here to walk across Northampton and visit the most famous person from Northampton, or in Northampton. You know who that is, don't you? Yeah, we're here to visit the great Alan Moore. The great Alan Moore. We're going to go and film an interview with Alan Moore at his home. And we're going to take a little walk across Northampton, picking up some of the sights along the way in what Ian is calling this unearthing of Alan Moore. Unearthing of Alan Moore. I'm so excited about this because I've been reading Alan's Voice of the Fire, which is an incredible kind of psychogeography of Northampton. And so I'm just kind of so excited about seeing some of those places and visiting the great Alan Moore at his home with the great Iain Sinclair. I mean, it's almost too much to absorb as a person, right? Thing is, I've momentarily lost Ian, but I think I can see him over there. There he is. Maybe that is our first location.
This is St. Peter's Church, which is where William Smith has his phenomenal monument. But they're not very keen to let us in. And this is the site of the early Saxon settlement. And it's, as you can see, it's a Norman church. It's one of the finest examples in the county. And that grave with the yellow flowers just over there, that is William Smith's grave. And making a journey here, staying with a man called Barker, he went out on a series of archaeological expeditions, caught a chill and died. So my sense of Northampton, apart from Alan Moore, who's embedded and needs unearthing, is that everybody else of significance who came here and who Alan writes about are people who were passing through, and many of them died and never got away. So there's some strange sense of Northampton being an alternative capital, like the centre of the country. And Smith was one of the most notable figures. Also, the reason I wanted to come here was inside this church is a fabulous green man, a very hirsute green man who's like an avatar of Alan Moore, imagined right back in Saxon times.
To Jerusalem in what, 9th century, something like that, who had found, he'd been at Golgotha and had found this lump of stone sticking out of the ground, and he'd excavated it, and it had turned out to be an ancient stone cross. And he'd thought, oh, this must be significant. At which point an angel had apparently helpfully appeared and said, yeah, this is really significant. You must take this cross and place it at the centre of your land. So the guy being thus directed had sort of come back to England, and I think he was from Medeshamstead, which was that was Peterborough. He was probably heading back to Peterborough, but he got halfway up Horseshoe Street with this surely heavy stone cross that he'd dragged all the way from Jerusalem, and he thought, I wonder if by any chance this spot where I'm standing now might perhaps be, please, the centre of my land, because I really can't carry it another step. And at this point the angel had turned up again, because apparently we used to get quite a lot of angels around the Mayfair area of Northampton during that period. And the angel said, yeah, you're dead right, mate, sort of, this is where to stick it.
Because the Saxon settlement was there, round about where St Peter's Church is.
Yeah, I would assume there was a Saxon church there before the Normans came and did it up again.
But we're not going to be able to see it. It's Sunday and they've locked churches, they locked the grounds. And in the church is a wonderful Green Man monument which I wanted to show, but we couldn't get in.
No, it's...
Do you know what's happening there? Is it?
I've no idea. I know that there was a period when, well, this would have probably been more than 10 years ago, but that was the last time I actually went into the church. We went down there was a sort of a woman vicar who was very nice, somebody that we knew was tending the flowers outside. They let us in, we saw William Smith's monument. They told us that they'd actually found the gravestone of St Ragina, who was allegedly entombed under the church, and that was one of the angels in Mayfair had directed somebody to the church where they unearthed the bones of St Ragina amidst a miraculous sort of stream of events. But yeah, I mean, it was apparently they'd found Ragina's actual gravestone in a ditch somewhere.
Samuel Becket used to make regular trips to Northampton, and when he came here to play cricket, all of the other members of the cricket team went off on a huge pub crawl, boozy night, and Becket, for some curious reason, because he didn't mind a drink, visited all of these Northampton churches. He made a special pilgrimage around the churches, including this one. Yeah, Hazelrigg House, just behind me, is a Tudor building, and it's where ostensibly Oliver Cromwell stayed here on the route to Naseby, and William Smith, the geologist we were talking about, who's buried in the church, actually died in this building, was taken down to the church there and buried. And so this is one of the kind of buildings that give you the sense of the residue of history in Northampton, and the way we're leading into Gold Street, which is a real trader's street up to the market area. Equally historic to Hazelrigg House, the Tudor house, on the other side of the street is the historic Ibis Hotel, which is where, after Alan Moore's wedding, which took place in the grounds of St Andrew's General Lunatic Asylum, he came on his honeymoon, because I was staying in the Ibis after his wedding ceremony and the celebrations. I went to stay there with Anna, my wife. When we got up to breakfast, who should appear but Alan and Mel, who had just got married, and this is where they chose to spend their first night. What's happening here, I mean, this street was the old alchemical street. This is literally where the gold traders were, but it's also to do with the gold of the transformation of language into pure gold by the people like John Clare, who's associated further up the street, and then ultimately Alan Moore himself.
This is a really fine street, Gold Street. So many high streets in Britain are kind of boarded up, closed down, run down. All the activity shifted to the out of town mall, but in Northampton, the town centre is very much alive. It's an impressive old historic town centre, isn't it?
This is the famous portico where John Clare used to sit every day. That's where John Clare came from the asylum, which was just down this road. He would be allowed to walk into town. He would take up his station, sitting right there. And if anyone wanted a poem written for a girlfriend or a little letter written, he would oblige for a pint or two and pass his time sitting there looking straight down Gold Street, you know, at the centre of the English energy structure. Alan always said a cross was found near here which was marked the very centre of England, and the dreaming of England was based here. And Clare, in his long 23-year exile in Northampton, this was his daily stroll. This is as far as he could come. His family never bothered to visit him, and he just lived in the dream, and occasionally wrote poems in the persona of Lord Byron or whoever. Became a plural entity. I mean, you kind of, this route walks itself as you step out of the station. You can't actually miss it.
No.
You're straight into the doorway, then the church, then the Gold Lane, then John Clare's spot. Everything reflected back to where he was never going to go.
There's a real magic here in Northampton town centre, so it's good that we're going to end this walk with an actual magician, a real person who creates magic with a K.
So we got the pose almost right. He was getting quite stout towards the end. He had his top hat out to drop the coins in.
Even this kind of sort of slightly modernist architecture here seems to be in the
But
spirit.
it's on the proportions, the civic proportions of probably a French town.
Yeah, yeah.
Where you feel there's a congregating market space where people sat around and talked. And that portico is literally designed for people to meet and sit and be there and look at what's going on.
This is Northampton Guildhall. This isn't where Alan used to come, is it?
It might well be. I thought it was actually a Labour, but it might well have been here. Could well be Working Men's Institute and Club. It very much feels like, as we came to drink with Alan after a poetry reading at the Templar Church, or it's the round Templar Church over there, where I was reading with Brian Catling, and it's the only time during a poetry reading someone went out in the middle and got a gun. And as we walked across the graveyard, he was taking pot shots. And they went into the pub, and it all settled down. He had a couple of drinks, and then he glassed somebody, and it all ended up with blood on the pavement. And Alan said, "Oh, it's just a standard night out in Northampton." And we went into the working men's club and had a few pints with a lot of old boys who were sitting there. Everything settled down into Northampton.
I do love an arcade, and this looks like a fantastic arcade here, the Northampton Cooperative Society building, and a beautiful Art Deco arcade beneath it. Here's another fine building. Reminds me of Etlow House in Latham, which I think is 18th century Etlow House, so I don't know what the age of this one is. This is St Andrew's Hospital.
So this is the site of what was the Northamptonshire General Lunatic Asylum, where John Clare was brought after his epic 4-day walk from High Beach in Epping Forest, when he charged back home to his village north of Peterborough, was picked up by a cart, didn't recognise his wife. She took him back to the cottage in Northborough to try him, and having tried him and rejected him, he was landed here for 23 years, where he settled into a whole secondary existence. And strangely enough, it's the same hospital that Lucia Joyce, the daughter of James, very troubled daughter, was put just at the time of the Second World War and remained here for the rest of her life. So she was here longer than John Clare. And she completed novels here and did a lot of writing, which was all just taken away and destroyed.
She was right next door to Violet Gibson, who was also a patient in St Andrews when Lucia would have been there. Violet Gibson was placed in St Andrews after she'd shot Mussolini up the nose. Apparently, I think Il Duce's prominent nose might have been there to draw fire from his face, because the bullet apparently lodged in his nostril, non-fatally.
And in the buildings at the back here was where Alan Moore chose to get married. And also on the other side of the wall was a school that Alan Moore attended and was expelled from, I don't know how old, around the age of 16 or something, for dealing LSD. So this is a pivotal spot in every sense. Not too far, we've just walked up 5 or 10 minutes from the St Andrew's Hospital, where Samuel Becket used on an annual basis to visit Lucia Joyce, James Joyce's daughter. But his one claim really to fame in terms of Northampton was he is the only Nobel Peace Prize winner to find himself in the Wisden Cricket Annual. And that's because he came here from Trinity College Dublin and played a county match against Northampton, in which he bowled 8 very tight overs for 17 runs, and there's some debate as to whether he bowled briskish off breaks or whether he bowled a stately medium pace of nagging accuracy, gave nothing away, and managed to bat and hang on for a few overs, maybe scored as much as 11 runs. But anyway, it's all there in Wisden, and this is the place where it happened. So Becket is really embedded in the matter of Northampton, and Alan Moore in his Jerusalem epic includes Becket and Lucia Joyce as part of the dialogue, along with John Clare and all of the other voices of the city. this is yours. It's dedicated to you anyway.
Oh,
And you've put
what's coffee?
they of course put you all over the cover.
Oh, well, thank you.
That's
so
just
much.
come. So after 70, I found there's a bonus in that things flow between time periods, and your own ego on them dissolves to some extent. That you know there's this multiple identity, and I see it in Long London, and I see it in Mike Moorcock and the Whispering Swarm. This idea
Sure.
that you're inhabiting several cities at the same time.
Yeah.
And what I find fascinating in Great Wen is that you have this crossroads, which is very distinct. It's a bit like Gold Street and the Portico. In London, Cannon Street Road, crossing Cable Street, where the Ratcliffe Highway murderer is staked through, and the Crown and Dolphin pub, and you have the head of Swedenborg in one of the bottles. So this guy who has had this, comes from outside, but has this vision of this duplicated double world in which we are the ghosts. It took me a long time to get that.
This is it. I mean, like in the Long London books, I mean, I'm trying to get over that. Yeah, this fantasy world that the characters enter into, that is actually the real world. That the real world is the shadows on the wall of Plato's
so
cave. You know.
The spinning figures with their apparent energy, often connected to specific locations, like Spare or like John Deakin for me,
Yeah.
are the ones who they're ghosts, but they're sort of special ghosts because they have a sense of sort of being almost into the other world as well.
Well, they have achieved by being disincarnate,
And by
perhaps.
being pariahs or being outsiders,
Yeah.
is to their benefit.
And they have become these timeless figures that sort of are, to some degree, more real and more permanent than...
And embedded in place very often.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
if you want to trace Spare, you go to specific locations.
Well, you can't really... I've come to the conclusion, probably after writing Unearthing, I came to the conclusion that, yeah, all right, there's psychogeography to, you know, if you want to call it that, which is a vital thing, which is talking about a place. But at the same time, when you're talking about a place, you're inevitably talking about the people who passed through that place. And when you're talking about a person, you're inevitably talking about the place in which they live or in which they originated. You can't really separate.
No, well, that's why I think the model, you know, in a way for all that, is what you did with Steve Moore and Shooter's Hill, called Unearthing, for the City of Disappearances. And what you've got there is that the place itself, Shooter's Hill, is so encrusted.
Yeah.
You know, as a great route into London, as Blackwood, as Steve Moore. And you tell the story of one guy's life it becomes almost a myth of himself and also a myth of London. And behind that is the history of the place. And then you've got yourself as an outsider and someone who's going to be, to a degree, mentored by Steve, coming into that world and having a kind of ironic and humorous take on aspects of the absurdity of the life. And then you become co-workers in magic, and he comes up here to Northampton. So the structure is just so rich, and it's a great model for the way to write. So like when I'm studying on Deakin, I'm trying to think in that same way, that there's little bits of autobiography, but they only lead you into the next episode around this character who I couldn't actually meet in the way that you knew Steve.
Sure.
And he was a mate, and he came here, and you conjured magic together in this house.
In this room.
In this very room. Surrounding this suburban housing estate are all these burial mound sites, which have all been wiped out except one, in which Steve looks at and knows that this is where he wants his ashes to go. And you have a description whereby looking at the place becomes the man. I mean, the windows of the houses become his eyes, the whole thing, he's incorporated into that. And then when he does die, he seems in some mysterious way to literally become part of it, in that people see him on the street after he's dead.
Well, this was, yeah, I mean, like Steve's final bowing out, when it had happened with, when I hadn't heard from him, I got, with the help of my daughter, I managed to get the police from Plumstead to go up and have a look. They'd seen that the house was locked and dark apart from a bluish light in an upstairs window. So they borrowed a ladder from a neighbour, went up the ladder, and found Steve dead. One of the things I was looking through when I went down to visit his house just after his death, I was looking for his dream record, which he kept meticulously every day. And the record included his dreams for, I think, a day or two before the day of his death. And there in the dream record it said, somebody is placing a ladder against the window of by my front door leading up to my study window. And then a man climbs up the ladder and plasters the window shut. That was all it was, but it was a bit uncanny given the circumstances. I mean, in Pariah Genius, I thought that the fact that you've got the dead John Deakin on his hotel room in Brighton from the start, and this is all, it's as if his death has unlocked his life.
Exactly.
And I wonder if that might pertain to what you were saying about when you get past 70, that you're obviously closer to your death than you are to your birth.
But that death is a kind of rebirth.
Yes, and that death unlocks the life.
Yes.
In our study of history, we cannot speculate upon what was going through people's minds or what they were feeling about certain things.
Well,
but we tend to exclude all of that, whereas they were obviously thinking something. They obviously had agendas. They were obviously perceiving things. You can only restore that with fiction.
You've got the other aspect of it is that obviously Deakin started out as a painter, and the only paintings I'd really seen were when he gave up photography because he kept losing his cameras and he got fed up with the whole scene. The paintings are sort of pseudo-primitive, there's sea serpents and fat ladies and all these things. But he actually was painting quite differently in the 30s when he was a big fan of Soutine, and I saw Mexican landscapes that were like nothing else I'd ever seen of his. So you wonder, how significant that aspect of painting and vision is, and the compulsion to take the photographs he was taking when he wasn't taking the ones that he had to do of either models or celebrity faces, when he was just wandering cities. He mostly took signage, graffiti, strange Chinese names left in Poplar and Shadwell, all that stuff.
So his visions as a painter, obviously they bled into his photography. And
by way of the military.
Yeah, and then his photography bled into Bacon's art.
Oh, totally. I mean, when I've seen all of the albums of Deakin's photographs, and then you go intimately alongside Bacon's catalogue raisonné, you realise how many things are actually directly lifted out of or arranged from Deakin. I mean, a lot of them under instruction from Bacon.
I mean, I was thinking about what you were saying, I think, when we were talking on the phone last, about how the pandemic in particular has emptied out the present.
Yeah.
And and because there isn't really, I think everybody's hesitating over even imagining a future, that only leaves the past to fill the vacuum.
Well,
so you get this kind of seepage of people and events and images from the past.
Well, in the earlier things, like in the earlier periods of writing, we were talking about Downriver or whatever, the Thatcher period, I was taught the same, and I thought the tragedy of that moment was that the past was the only thing that was left to colonise.
Yeah.
So that our past was being rewritten by the politicians who were literally going into it and changing it to fit their own narratives,
yeah.
particularly with America. and they're imposing that on the world at large. I think we've gone kind of beyond that to something much more weird and dangerous now, especially with the sort of AI technologies and the duplications. That there is no fixed past. It's nothing worth colonising.
There's no fixed present.
Past has been eliminated.
There's no fixed past. There's no fixed reality.
No.
Where everything is up for grabs. Sort of the difference between past and present, the difference between fact and fiction, has been eroded to a point where.
And you walk through Northampton, and we're walking here, and we pass the Northampton cricket ground, and he's like, Samuel Becket came here, and he bowled 8 overs for 17 runs, and he's there, he's blinking through his spectacles, and he's recorded in Wisdom, the Book of Truth. Here he is, in this spot where we are now standing. That is a verifiable past. It's completely strange and weird, but there it is.
That is it.
You're looking at St Andrew's Hospital. Well, Alan Moore got married there. I witnessed it. I think it happened.
But it
came along with a horse and could it have been a horse and a
there was a horse and carriage
coming down this road? I think there was, but it may have remembering that from another century.
Yeah.
And John Clare, I can't imagine him in this building.
And I remember on that particular day there was a cricket match going on between the patients. Yeah, these things all happened, even though
it did happen. Yeah.
Even though they couldn't possibly have done from the context of modern reality. This is perhaps why it becomes more. You see, in my view of the universe and of time, it's all happening at once anyway.
Yes.
And so the past never goes. The past isn't cancelled. It doesn't just disappear into a void. It's it's part of the present. It's inside the present. It's the skeleton of the present. Just as the present is the skeleton of the future. All of these places, all of these people, they're all threaded through each other. Yeah. It is one thing. The location, the people who are in it.
But there's an interesting connection as well between, in Jerusalem, between all of these things that are embedded and happening here and London and St Paul's, that there seems to be some kind of neural trench or pathway between here and there that connects up in interesting ways. What's the basis of that?
Well, that was, I suppose, something that it was largely because my great-grandfather, Ginger Vernon, who becomes Snowy Vernal in Jerusalem, he would apparently, he came from Lambeth, had walked up to Northampton, where he had found a wife, and that but he was constantly travelling, always on foot, between the two places, between Lambeth and Northampton, between the boroughs of Northampton. So this, I tended to think, well, there are other people who've made a similar journey.
You've got the Eleanor Crosses.
You've got the Eleanor Crosses. You've got, indeed, the monk who had returned from Jerusalem with his stone cross that he put at St Gregory's. You've got all of these people that I thought, surely in time they must have worn a path of meaning and significance between the two places.
Well, between the two, Lambeth quite close, Brian Catling coming up to the Templar Church here and giving that reading, which you also write about, when someone takes a gun.
Yeah. So, and that really happened as well.
I know. Well, did it? I think I was there.
I think that you were there, and I was
telling John about it on our way. Can that really have happened? Well, it's in the book.
I suppose all of this, it's like the meaning and the poetry of people and places is much more real than the actual substance.
Yeah.
I mean, if you go to a place and you don't know anything about it, it's just a place. It hasn't got any presence. But if you know all of these
Once-
little coincidences and
Once
things.
you've let these characters, any of these nominated characters appear in your world, they don't go away.
Yeah, it's only when you actually scratch the surface of what is popularly known that you discover this kind of seam of fossil material that is full of energy, full of fuel. You know, it's sort of no. I think that the past is ever with us, and I think that just becomes more noticeable when you are approaching the point where you will become the past
Ever with us and ahead of us.
and ahead of us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't want to kind of bury you, John. I think we've
That's amazing.